All right, we're going to talk with Darnell Little, who has looked at a lot of the testing issues. Darnell, pleasure to have you out here today.
Nice to meet you, Professor.
Darnell, tell us a little bit. You wrote one article in particular that I found intriguing, which was Test Scores Don't Count the Neediest. Can you talk a little bit about how you came upon that story or what motivated you to look at testing issues in general?
That story really came about from looking at the number of tests which really don't count for determining whether a school has made what under NCLB is called adequate yearly progress. And that's basically the determinant for whether a school is passing or failing under NCLB. One of the things, though, with NCLB is that there's a lot of fine print that you have to read. And in that fine print, you see a lot about what tests counts toward the final score you see on that report card and which tests don't count for it. And in looking at it further, we found that there are thousands and thousands of tests which didn't count toward the final score for determining whether a school made adequate yearly progress. So for instance, the first round of tests that aren't counted are, of course, tests which are considered to be invalid. And that's simply because the kid who filled out the test didn't answer a minimum number of questions in order for them to score the test. And a lot of those tests were filled out by special ed disabled students. And so those tests don't count, obviously, because there's no score. However, under NCLB in Illinois, if a student started school after September 30th, then those test scores don't count toward the school's AYP score. So those tests are essentially for AYP purposes not counted, thrown out. And we found that there were thousands and thousands of those tests where they weren't counted because the student was marked as being attending the school after September 30th. And we did find a lot of cases where that was marked erroneously, where the kid actually was in school before September 30th, but there was an error during the testing time and they were marked that they started after, so their test was thrown out. We found individual schools where almost 90% of the tests weren't counted because of an error like that.
Let me interrupt real quick. That's a very interesting issue because part of, I think, perhaps the public perception is that No Child Left Behind means that every single student is tested and that the school uses that information to find out how they're doing.
Well, the test is counted for the overall school average which is given, which is outside of the AYP section. But for AYP purposes, it's not tested, and the reason that was given is simply that if that kid didn't attend that school for the entire school year, then many of the people in the school say they should not be held accountable for that child's performance. So for the district averages, the test is counted, but for that individual school, it's not, and a lot of schools think it's really not fair. And actually, starting this year, that date has been moved from September 30th to May 1st. So now if the kid did not attend the school by May 1st of that previous year, then their tests won't count for that school. So a lot of the schools, think that's justified. They think that if we don't have that kid for the entire school year, then we shouldn't be held accountable for that kid's performance. The flip side of that is, especially among lower income kids, there's a lot of mobility that goes on. Some schools have a fairly high mobility rate, and the performance of those kids for AYP purposes isn't being counted.
I guess that would be my question too, is that there was in your article a principle that spoke about how the transient kids or kids that are mobile or aren't there during much of the year shouldn't be counted because they don't want those kids to represent their school. But what if that is your school? What if 30% or 40% even of your school has so many transient kids? How do you account for those?
Well, basically under AYP, they don't get accounted for. I mean, for schools like that with mobility rates that high, the odds are that they probably didn't make AYP anyway. And also the odds are that if you looked at their overall, whether it's the elementary school test, the ISAT, or if it's the PSAE, which is the high school test, the odds are that schools with that mobility rate that's that high, that's over that kind of threshold, probably isn't doing that well anyway. But under AYP, there's a lot of pressure on these schools. to make it. And the schools that have the most difficulty making AYP are the schools that are the most diverse, the schools that have diverse populations of low-income students, of various minority students, but especially of special ed students. And any edge that they can get to help them get over that hump of AYP, they take, and they're grateful for it. So.